Welcome to another episode of Innovation and the Future of Pharmacovigilance, a podcast series brought to you by Trulient Talks. I'm your host, Indy Alawalia, and I'm delighted to navigate the dynamic world of pharmacovigilance and risk management with you. But first, a quick disclaimer. The opinions expressed in this episode are solely those of the individual guest and do not necessarily reflect the official views of Trulient Consulting or their own company. We're all about fostering insightful conversations here at Trulient Talks, and we want you to know that any product, vendor, or service mentioned does not imply an endorsement. If you're seeking professional advice for specific situations, we encourage you to go to our experts. Please remember this podcast content is meant for informational and educational purposes only. Now, today we have a fantastic guest with us. We have Pihl, who is Director of Operations Technology and Analytics in the Global Patient Safety at AstraZeneca, and she leads the ICSR Process Partnerships team as our guest speaker. Marie, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, Marie, we always start with the same question here on the podcast, and it's a really simple one. How did you get into PV?
Yeah, so I think I ended up in PV by coincidence. And I also ended up in pharma after sort of starting my work career in a very different area. So when I finished high school, I was trained as an assistant nurse. And my goal and ambition and interest was to work at the Children's Hospital in Gothenburg. So when I was 18 years old and graduated, that's where I started. So I worked as an assistant nurse. I also had children very early. So I had 3 children within a few years, and my latest child is born in 1994. And at that time, I was sort of starting to think, what would I like to do with my life, and where should I go if I would decide to go in a different direction or pathway. And I live in Gothenburg, and I've been passing the AstraZeneca office many times and thinking that maybe someday it would be very nice to be there. And what would it take to get me there? Mm-hmm. I was also a bit interested in forensic medicine. So I started to think about chemistry, biology, and in those areas. So when my youngest child was 1 year old, I realized that I first need to sort of upgrade my high school exam. Mm-hmm. So I did math in the evenings, and then I did a complementary graduation in high school. So I covered sort of the basics in math and English and a few other subjects. Since I was aiming for university, I also had to do a scientific base course for a year. And when I've done that, I applied for university. So I did molecular biology. So when I decided to sort of start my journey, I realized that I had at least 6 years of education to look forward with. And I also had 3 small children.
Wow.
But I started, and I ended up in a class. And also, actually, I would like to highlight one of my classmates, because we were in a very similar situation. And we tagged team, and we managed to get through university in the 4 years that were expected. We both had small children, so we know how to sort of use every single opportunity to read and to train and to sort of learn in the area. I also was working weekends in the hospital, of course, because I had to have an income on the side. But I'm also in Sweden, and we have a fantastic system. So I also got funding via different channels. So in the end, I ended up in doing my master thesis in AstraZeneca. And then, of course, that was my goal to sort of get my foot into the company. And when I did my university, I realized maybe that I was not the person who would be happy in a lab. And since I have my background in medicine and children's nurse, it somehow became quite clear to me that moving into patient safety was an area that was both close to my heart and to my sort of education. So I applied for a position. I didn't hear anything. We all know that recruitment in big pharma can take a long time, and I graduated from high school, and I actually had to go back to my old work. So I had to go back and work as an assistant nurse for about 6 months, and then they called from AstraZeneca and wanted an interview.
Wow.
So I went to the interview and I got the job. So in 2003, I started my career at AstraZeneca, and I've been with AstraZeneca since. And I must say that being part of such a big company, even though I've been here for 21 years, I've had many different jobs. So when I started, I did case processing. But I also very early sort of showed that I was interested in leading people and more sort of personal matters. So after a few years, I became line manager. Case handling, as many people know in pharma, is a very sort of resource demanding activities. So most pharma are outsourcing. So during the time, that was also the direction for AstraZeneca. So we decided to outsource case processing. So we picked the vendor. And I think maybe AstraZeneca chose a slightly different way of handing over and ramping up, because we actually staffed up a team at the vendor location.
Wow.
So we had people at the vendor location in Europe, in Budapest, for almost a year. So we were a few people going there from Sweden, including myself, and also from other case handling sites in AstraZeneca. So that was maybe the first big move for me in my career, because we know that we were supposed to be redundant. And I was thinking that maybe it's a good idea not to sort of become redundant with 40 other people in the same area. So what can I do to maybe build on my capacity and capability, and at least sort of maybe come home in a different time window? Yeah. So I spent 6 months in Budapest, training the new vendor. And that was, of course, a fantastic experience. Working with colleagues from different sites in AstraZeneca, but also building this new delivery service, because we were sort of training the sort of the basic and the new pool of resources. So I did that for 6 months, and that was in 2009. And then it was time to come home, and I didn't have a position. So I did apply for a few vacant positions, and was again called for an interview in patient safety. So I managed to come back into a sort of different case. It was in the sort of more strategic operational area, so with periodic reports and surveillance. But I actually did come back as a line manager, and line management has been more or less a red thread for me. So I've been doing line management in surveillance periodics. I've been doing line management. In a big company, there is a lot of reorganizations. So at one point, we decided to divide the deliverables in early and late. And since I am a molecular biologist by training, then I was more interested in working in the what we call translational, so early stage of development. So then I worked in that area for a few years. But at that time, I think I've been working at AstraZeneca for almost 10 years, and I did line management for a long time. And we were again reorganizing. And every time that happens, you need to think about what will be my next step and what will be my next move. And I think there are different ways to do career, and it could be that you are sort of always aiming for the top, or it could be that you want to sort of use your previous experience and then maybe grow sideways. And I think that's have been more my style. So at that point, I took an opportunity to work in regulatory for some time, and I didn't know anything about regulatory. But they anyway wanted me because the leader of that department felt that I had such a long experience from change and line management, and the new team they were creating had a lot of experts. So I teamed up with a colleague. She was an expert in regulatory, and I think they saw me more as the most experienced people in change and line management. So we sort of led a team together, I would say, and we came with different strengths and capabilities, and did that for some time. But I have felt that I sort of missed patient safety. So patient safety has been my home for almost my entire career. But I also felt that I needed a break from line management. So when I decided to go back to patient safety, it was in a leading function, but with no sort of responsibility in the line management area. So leading people or leading staff, but rather leading a deliverable. And I also went into sort of this vendor piece. And I mean, I did have experience from being a ramp up resource. So I came back and then worked a lot with our vendor, looking over the, I would say, 4 main safety service deliverables. So it was case handling, medical review, periodic report, and safety services. But everything was focusing on vendor oversight, collaboration, sort of improvements in that area. So then I did that for a few years. And then we decided to reorganize again. So at that point, AstraZeneca decided to merge process and vendor management into the same function. So instead of covering a sort of broader scope of safety services, we were divided in smaller chunks. But in that chunk, you also were responsible for the process piece and the vendor piece. So that's how I ended up in ICSR. So I mean, where I started with case handling has been the backbone. I've always known our safety database. I've known the basics, and then I've sort of built onto that sort of core capability in different ways. And currently I am working as a senior director. So I am leading a team of, I think we are 17 people today. And in that capacity, we have managed to work through COVID and all the challenges that came with COVID, when we had to relocate all our vendors and all the deliverables. You always need to ensure that you are compliant in this area. So that was, of course, a great challenge. Then AstraZeneca launched the vaccine, and that also came with the challenges in the case handling space and the patient safety area. And now recently we have decided to move from an home-built, custom safety database. I think we were the latest sort of big pharma staying with a home-built system, now going into a more off-the-shelf system. So I think that's what we've been doing for the last 2 years, planning for that. So that's where I am today. We've now launched the new database, and of course it's an extremely busy time for us to ensure that we get in shape and get the system working and get down to sort of business as usual. But as a summary, I would say that sometimes it's been coincidence, sometimes it's been decisions that I've taken sort of deliberately. But I think I have always tried to use my previous knowledge and then build on that. And I've never been afraid to try, both when it came to taking a decision to start university. And I mean, sometimes it feels that I started maybe in a slightly unusual order, having children and then going to university and then build a career. But I'm also hoping, and I know that I have inspired people in my family and closest sort of friends, that it's possible and it's worth it. And I've never ever regretted to sort of starting university or joining this big pharma. And I would say that every day I learn something new, and sometimes are more challenging than others. But you just hang in there.
I am completely fascinated by your career. It's to do all of that. So right from the university's point that you made, like to do that, to be in uni, to have kids, to be working part-time as well, knowing that you wanted to go to AstraZeneca as well, which is, quite frankly, if I were to choose a company and think, am I going to get there? I don't know if I could get there, but your fortitude and your sort of, I wouldn't say arrogance. It's not arrogance, but your one track mind of that's what you want to do. You weren't quite sure what was going to happen, but you wanted to be there. It's just amazing. And I can see why people look at your career and say, well, if you could do it, maybe I could do it. But I think at the end of the day, it's amazing. And one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit in industry at the moment is that it's turned, especially since COVID, it's turned very siloed. So people who are at that point where they're trying to make decisions of where to go with their career. I've spoken to people that think that the career path can only be linear. But you were saying as well that you prefer much more broad experience before moving up, and you've kind of gone like sideways and up, and then sideways and up throughout your career. What advice would you give to these sort of the younger people right now? Because I think there is a sense of, one, being a bit afraid to take risks, and secondly, I think it's not very clear in this more sort of siloed age about what to do. And especially when remote working comes in as well, where you don't have necessarily the the bigger picture of what's going on?
I think that, my way of sort of thinking and sort of approaching things is sometimes very simple, but in a way true. I'm thinking sometimes, how on earth will I manage this? And then I'm thinking, well, if I'm not the right person, who is? And this could sound maybe arrogant, but sometimes I'm thinking, okay, I know what I know. And as long as you feel confident in what your sort of capabilities are, I think that you need to try. And I've been working as a line manager and leader for a long time. And I think that for us, the winning concept is that in my team, I have people who are junior and middle and senior. There is very little prestige in our team because we know that when something hits us, we need to deliver together as a team. So there's no such a thing as being senior or junior. Everyone is rolling up their sleeves in order to deliver. I think that we have also built an environment where you can ask everything, and it needs to be a very open and transparent and trustworthy environment, because that's, for me, is the only way you can learn. You need to feel confident in failing. You need to feel confident in trying, and maybe knowing that I will not manage on my own, but I always have people who will be there to support and back me up. And I think that's been my way in sort of developing my team, is that first you get quite a lot of hand-holding, then you try on your own and you check in, and then finally you are ready. And pharma is not an area where you do quick careers, in my mind, because it's such a complex area of working, and you can be an expert in a small area, but then you need to start to understand, how does this little area link into others, and how do I get to understand the bigger picture? And that takes time. And I think that if I should give any advice to maybe the younger generation, is that I would think it's a challenging and difficult area to do a quick sort of career movement upwards. Also, I want to say that I think that doing career is not only just to reach a more senior position, because we are different. We are different in what is sort of our driver, and what is our interest, and what is our strength. And some people are experts, and maybe their career is to dig deeper. Some people have a view of maybe climbing in a position and have more of a leadership capability. And some people find that it's a more appealing career to actually have one starting point and then broaden yourself. And I think that it's important that we acknowledge that all these three variations are different types of careers. Yeah. And it suits different kinds of people. And in the end, you need all of these categories in order to make a successful team. Because you can't have a team of people who just want to sort of climb and do career. You need someone to take the lead and make sure you get the other people with you. But if you don't have experts who are there sort of digging and analyzing, and also the people who want to understand maybe the broader concept, I think then you will have a challenge overall in sort of developing and moving such a team forward, and also ensuring that you have the right capabilities in a team. So, yeah, 2 advices. Don't be afraid to jump, because, it could go wrong, but hopefully no one will I mean, you will not be penalized for that. That's a way of learning. And then also don't always look at the career to be upwards. It's also, there are other ways to do career, and that depends on your personality and your interest.
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's, and maybe this is going a bit too philosophical, but I don't know if it's due to the fact of the way that social media portrays everything to be perfect, that the newer generation are like, well, no, it has to be perfect. Like, it cannot fail. And I think your point about, if it fails, it fails. At least you've learned something out of it.
Yeah.
I think that is a really fair point.
And many times it's also an unknown area. So when you are moving forward, you don't actually know what's right or wrong. And then you just need to, trust your gut feeling, hopefully some of your experience, and then do what you think is best. But when I say you, I don't mean you as a single person. It's the combined you of the team and the joint capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So together you can make decisions to move forward. And that could be within your team, but equally well working cross-functionally. Because since in AstraZeneca we are divided in ICSR, periodic reports, signal management, risk management, but in the end everything links together under sort of the GDP pharmacovigilance umbrella. And you need to understand that you are moving in the right direction with all those different sort of expert areas and not only looking at your own area.
That's a really fair point as well.
Mm-hmm.
To go back on something that you talked about. So AstraZeneca were obviously one of the early adopters of vendors, I think. Maybe not the first, but certainly one of the early adopters. And you said that actually the way that AstraZeneca went about it was by making sure that the vendor were trained to AstraZeneca standards rather than just being a vendor and outsourcing everything and just, there you go deal with it. How did that decision come about? Because at the time, now you kind of expect it, but at the time that must have been quite a shock to the system. The vendor probably weren't too happy either.
At that time, I was more sort of operational. So I was not really part of the decision thinking and the strategic goals. But in AstraZeneca, we have actually been very dedicated to keep the sort of oversight. And I know when we speak to vendors and when we have different interaction, you understand that they sort of come with a lot of expertises and they are willing to pick up most of the sort of deliverables and activities in the area. But being part of, I don't know how many inspections. Have you been in this area for such a long time? You have also been part of very, very many inspections of, bigger and smaller and from major authorities and smaller authorities. And I think that almost every time, I think the question is, how do you ensure that you have oversight of the deliverables? So I think that we've been, from the beginning, keeping that the strategy comes with AstraZeneca. The operational deliverables is managed by our vendor. But we have also, with time, developed a very true, I would say true partnership with the vendor we are working with or the vendors. And for me, that also comes with, it's not like we tell them what to do and they do it. I think that we tell them what we want and together we figure out how we do it. And that, I think, has also been a winning concept, because when I look at the vendors I work with, I see them definitely as an extended extension of my team, not as a vendor. We have experts with the vendors who support us in inspections. We have vendors in that area who can advise on more efficient way of working. So we are collaborating a lot. Of course, the majority of the sort of the vendor delivery is operational, and they do what we ask them to do. But I think that we have developed a very close relationship where we listen a lot on our vendor on how to best do things, because they have experience with other pharma, and of course we are interested to hear if other pharma have found a smarter or simpler or more efficient way of working, and we are open to listen to that. But we have never left the strategic pieces or sort of oversight of process. So how we interpret the regulatory framework, how we define it, we've kept that in-house. But then how we deliver it, I would say that is sort of an area where we are more collaborating. And then to do the final delivery, that is with the vendor. I don't know if that answered your question, but it's been our model from the beginning that we set the strategic direction, and then we sort of find a way to get there. And what I was going to say is that it's been quite a lot of inspections where we have been asked on how we can prove oversight, how we can prove the overall responsibility, the accountability. And we have been able to prove that because we can sort of show that the overarching elements are managed by AstraZeneca and then in the collaboration. And I think that's given us the confidence that we also know what's going on, and that's how we want to have it.
How, with, you've been involved in a lot of these change projects as well. Have you ever been, I'm sure there are people out there that are thinking similar, but have you been in a situation where the change is not going well, and that, quite frankly, you're there thinking, do we can this change or not? I mean, this could be internal or external, but have you been in that situation where you just actually, we need to make a decision and stop this right now?
We actually have.
Okay.
So when I would say that in all these change initiatives, I think you have that feeling multiple times. Sometimes you know that there is no way back. So you just need to make sure that it works. And that could be more or less challenging. But we did have an occasion when we were developing the vaccine, and of course we had huge inflow of case reports, ICSRs, and we had to find ways to deal with that. And we had multiple activities, but one of the activities was to see if we could maybe utilize a different database. Not necessarily replacing, it wasn't definitely the time to replace the database, but if we could have something complementary that could give us more automation. So we had a initiative with one of the sort of system developers. And I think we collaborated for almost 2 years with them. And we launched it. And then we actually stopped that and went back to our in-house system, because we did not feel that the system delivered the quality and technology that we were expecting. And that was, of course, a very difficult decision after 2 years of developing something. And then deciding to actually close it down and move back. So it happened, and that was a very,
That is a I mean, that's a very strong statement that, you know, you experimented and then suddenly stopped. And I'm guessing there's a lot of times within these change projects, where you probably thinking that, like, you're in the middle of a change project and, I don't know, the vendor or something's really annoyed you, and you're thinking, right, let's just, like, the automatic reaction sometimes is, let's just can this now. How do you get through those motions through a change project? Like, how do you then make sure that it is a successful outcome for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very difficult question, because in the end, it's very, I mean, it's more like sort of sighing into the future to see if it will be successful or not. I think that most of the time it works. It could be hard work and a lot of work and a lot of frustration, but you anyway feel that there is something there that we can build on, and we have a common goal, a common objective, a common understanding. And I would say that, of course, there has been ups and downs in the vendor collaboration. I think what we have learned is that you can't sort of think that we are now in a good place and now it works well, so now we can sort of leave it and it's sort of operating on its own, so we focus on something else. Then you realize, and I'm using the analogy of a garden, because you can have a very nice garden with flowers and straight lines and no weed. But if you don't maintain it and give it the time and love and that it needs, it's quite quickly sort of weed takes over. So I think that it's not like it's a constant work. It takes a lot to sort of get it in shape, and then you need to make sure you have the right resources to maintain that. And it's much better to maintain it in a decent way, or thinking that we can leave that for now and they manage on their own and we do something else and come back. So I think that has been actually one learning, because in times where you need to do tough priorities, you may think that you can set things aside. So I think that's a learning, to make sure that you still always maintain the sort of momentum. But then also, I said in the beginning that we have recently moved into a new database. I mean, that's not working. That's not a straight way forward. There are a lot of challenges. It's a lot of frustration. It's a lot of people involved. And sometimes you think that, can we just sort of leave this and go back? But I mean, first of all, I don't think we have an alternative this time, but I also think that there is a different operation around it. So I know that in the end, we will be successful, because people are engaged, they are competent, they are understanding the criticality. It's a lot, and right now it feels overwhelming. But when you anyway feel that the people who are collaborating have the right mindset and the right tools and the right competencies, I sort of believe that we will get there in the end. And I think I just need to trust the journey, sort of. And I mean, change could be so many things. It could be changing an organization, changing job, changing a system, changing a vendor. You go through the same phases, but after some time you also know that, yes, there will be ups and there will be downs, and in the end it will be stable state. And I think also to trust the process.
Yeah. I think
of
that's,
change.
yeah. I think that's such a good way of thinking, and you're right. You guys are still going through, even though it's live. You are going through a major change. Like, this is not a simple, I don't know, let's change from writing on a piece of paper to putting it in a spreadsheet. This is massive changes. And the one thing I liked about your garden analogy, and I'm just going to bring this in, because I was thinking recently about, again, AI. AI is what everyone's talking about. But your analogy of a garden, I might have to take, because that also applies to AI. It's like, yeah, you can change the process completely and have it all automated. But who's managing that automation? Who is actually looking to make sure that what it's supposed to be doing is actually the correct thing to be doing? Who's making those little trims to the hedges to make sure that they're not growing uncontrollably? Or my garden is an absolute state, but yeah, I fully appreciate that, and that thought. Now we've come to close to the end of the podcast, and I always ask a question at the end, and this podcast is called Innovation and the Future of Pharmacovigilance. Now, I wanted to get your thoughts on, what do you think the future is? Like, what's going to happen to a PV department? What's going to happen to operations? And what's going to happen to vendors, actually, to vendor now? Is that working still the way that it was supposed to work before? Is technology going to take over? What are your thoughts?
My very personal thought and opinion is that I think that we've been talking about automation for a very, very long time. But I also think that sometimes we look at automation in very different ways. And there are big consortia and collaboration frameworks and networks in PV, where you every year is sort of talking about how much you automate and what's automation for you and where are we going. And I think that we had this home-built tool, old, on a platform that we know couldn't survive forever. And then we move into newer technology, cloud-based. And I must admit that I am surprised about the automation and technology we had in this home-built tool. We thought that it was quite a manual tool. But when you look at it and realize that there were a lot of decisions that were made, but it's so, automation could be from the sort of simple, I mean, you can have different tools or bots that are operating on top. You can have some rule-based learning. You can have some more maybe intelligent learning. But I mean, the more complex it gets, the more challenging I think it gets. And I was recently at the Drug Safety World Conference, and everyone is talking about AI. And in every session, you look at this nice presentation about what's coming and how the world is moving. But sometimes it feels like that I'm not questioning that it will come and we will get there, but I'm sort of wondering more when, because we talk about it and we've been talking about it for years. And I think that when we say automation, we think that it will be like a case comes in and it goes out and you don't do anything and you save all these manual resources and everyone is happy and cost is going down, but AI, to your point, that also needs oversight, because the rule-based learning, that's not, and that's an easy win and an easy thing to implement. But when you start to sort of use these more intelligent artificial learnings, you need to understand if that thing is taking the right decision. And the more it learns, is it learning the right things? Are we feeding it with the right references or sort of decision points? And I would not be confident in letting it go away, because I think we are moving resources from manual hands-on input to ensuring that the tool is operating a correct way. Is the output what we were expecting from the input? Were the decisions right? And I think that when I hear the regulators, it's nice with automation, and that's maybe the only solution for us, because there will be increased case volumes. We can't solve that with adding more people. We need to find other ways that are more efficient. But you also then need to be able to prove how your tool is behaving, how it's learning, how it's executing. And sometimes I don't even know if we know what's happening. So it's a gray area. I also think that the pharma industry is very keen to make efficiencies and find more innovative ways of doing it. I don't necessarily think that the regulatory framework is there yet. So I think we definitely need to collaborate. So I think that what we have seen the last couple of years is actually that the regulatory agencies across the world is not going into a more standardized, harmonized way of looking at the framework. I think that we see all these small sort of specifics or deviations. So each and every regulatory authority would like things in a slightly different way. And in a big global pharma, it's getting more or less impossible to meet all these. You have one global database, but you have all these local deviation. And I think that's extremely challenging. And I would hope that somehow, if we can come together, both pharma and agencies, to understand that we need to have a more standardized, harmonized way of looking at PV, at the sort of the management of the different areas, so that we can see efficiencies, because it's very difficult to be automated and efficient when you don't have a standardized framework to as your reference.
I think that's again a fantastic point. Marie, it's been fantastic having you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.